Picture the announcement the way the rest of the world saw it. A palace statement so polished you could check your reflection in it. Every word weighed, every comma placed, every photograph staged to look effortless. Prince George, the little boy destined to sit on the throne one day, quietly stepping into a ceremonial honor that most people assumed had his name on it from the moment he was born. From the outside, it read like one of those gentle royal milestones. The kind that makes people smile, nod, and scroll past. But inside one royal residence, that same announcement was landing like a splash of ice water. Because the news that made everyone else shrug made one woman stop what she was doing, mid-morning, with a press release still in her hands. And within hours, the palace was reportedly dealing with something far heavier than a family disagreement. This wasn't hurt feelings over a single title. It wasn't even a simple misunderstanding. What actually happened, according to the people closest to the story, was the end of a quiet war that most people never even knew was being fought. Now, the version of events that lit up the headlines was simple, and it went something like this. Prince William had drawn a line. A granddaughter of Queen Camilla was suddenly out of the running for anything resembling a royal honor. And the reason floating around, the one that made the story explode, involved a shocking alleged clash with Prince George himself. A confrontation that, if even half of what was reported is true, changed the entire direction of the family feud in a single afternoon. But here's the first thing you need to understand. None of it exploded overnight. The attack that made the tabloids scream, whatever it actually was, never got an official version of events. The palace didn't confirm it. They didn't deny it either. They simply went silent, which, if you know anything about how the royals operate, is usually the loudest answer of all. And that silence was the real story. Because the decision to keep Camilla's granddaughter out of the royal future wasn't made in the heat of one nasty moment. It was made years earlier, in a dozen small ways, in seating charts and photo crops and meetings that never quite happened. The alleged incident just gave William a reason to finally say it out loud. So let's back up. Because to understand why one announcement could crack a queen so completely, you have to understand the woman underneath the crown, the life she lived to get there, and the family she spent decades trying to drag into the light with her. Camilla didn't arrive at the palace gates carrying an easy history. She arrived carrying one of the most complicated reputations in modern royal memory. For years, she was the name the public loved to hate. The woman blamed for tearing apart a marriage the entire planet had watched in real time. The supposed other woman in a love triangle, so famous it practically became a national soap opera. She survived being vilified in the press, mocked on late-night television, and reduced again and again to a single ugly word: homewrecker. And anyone who thinks that kind of public hatred evaporates the moment you're handed a crown hasn't been paying attention. It follows you. Not loudly, not always visibly, but it follows. By the time she became queen consort, standing beside Charles at the coronation, the argument about whether she belonged was officially over. Nobody could question her place at his side anymore. The marriage was sealed, the crown was on her head, and the world had finally mostly moved on. But here's the thing the cameras never captured. Becoming queen didn't cure Camilla's hunger for acceptance. It just gave it a new target. Now it wasn't about her anymore. It was about her blood. Camilla has 2 children from her first marriage, to Andrew Parker Bowles. Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopez. Real, loved, and completely untitled. Neither of them ever carried a royal style. Neither of them ever worked as a member of the family firm. In palace language, they were civilians. Welcome at Christmas, folded into family photographs, genuinely adored by their mother. But when it came to the official machinery of royalty, invisible. And Camilla was never going to accept that quietly forever. Because children grow up, and grandchildren arrive. Tom has 2 of his own, Freddy and Lola Parker Bowles. Laura has Eliza and Gus. These are the kids who grew up inside the royal orbit without any of the royal trappings. Same Christmases. Same palaces. Same family dinners. But no titles. No ceremonial roles. No official existence at all. And for a woman who had clawed her way from public disgrace to the very center of the monarchy, watching her grandchildren live in the shadow of that world without ever being allowed inside, it was a wound that never stopped bleeding. And this is where the story stops being simple. Because Camilla didn't sulk. She didn't complain about it in public, not once. What she did instead was start building. Quietly. Carefully. In ways too small to draw fire, but too consistent to miss. It started with invitations. Suddenly, her Parker Bowles family began appearing at royal events they'd never been invited to before. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would make anyone raise an eyebrow. Just presence, slowly increasing. Then came the photographs. Carefully composed, carefully timed, and always featuring the same faces. If you paid close attention to the royal photo lineups over the years, you might have noticed Freddy Parker Bowles edging closer and closer to the center of the frame, standing nearer to the Windsor children, appearing in more and more official pictures. Not pushed exactly, just positioned. And people inside Camilla's own circle knew exactly what was happening. They saw it for what it was. A long, patient campaign to groom the family's most presentable faces into the acceptable image of the Parker Bowles name. Someone charming enough, polished enough, and royal-looking enough to quietly bridge the gap that had always existed between her family and the institution she'd married into. She was clever about it too. She never once marched into a room and demanded a title outright. That would have been far too obvious, and Camilla has never been obvious. Instead, she let the photographs do the arguing. She let Freddy's presence at table after table, event after event, say the things she could never say out loud. My family belongs here. They can serve this monarchy, not just orbit it. At private dinners, his achievements somehow came up, naturally, always at the right moment. At charity functions, his name found its way into the conversation whenever the right people were standing close enough to hear it. She pushed for her grandchildren to appear in palace newsletters and Christmas cards. Individually, each move was nothing. A tiny wind. But stacked one on top of another, year after year, it became a campaign. And then Charles took the throne, and Camilla saw her opening. With her husband as king, the influence she'd been quietly building suddenly had real weight behind it. According to a retired palace aide, there was actually serious talk behind closed doors about handing Freddy Parker Bowles a minor hereditary title. Nothing enormous. Nothing that would make the public scream. Maybe a barony. Small enough to slip through without a storm, big enough to do the one thing Camilla had been working toward for years. It would put the Parker Bowles name into the official royal record. Permanently. On paper. Where it could never be quietly forgotten again. But here's where the story takes its first sharp turn. One year, at the royal family's traditional Christmas walk to church, Camilla made her boldest move yet. She arranged for Freddy to stand directly behind Prince George and the other young royals, exactly where every camera would catch him, shoulder to shoulder with the future of the monarchy. That was the whole plan. One photograph. One image of her grandson standing with the next generation, printed everywhere, and the message would almost write itself. My family is part of this. The picture would have done all the talking. Only that's not what happened. A senior courtier spotted the arrangement before a single shutter clicked. Freddy was pulled out of the line, immediately, and repositioned at the very back, standing with household staff, seconds before the photographers started shooting. And here's the detail that made it genuinely cruel. Camilla watched the entire thing from across the courtyard. She saw her grandson positioned beside the future of the monarchy, then physically removed and pushed to the margins like someone had suddenly remembered he didn't belong there. And there was absolutely nothing she could do about it. What was she supposed to do, in the middle of a royal Christmas gathering, start a scene? Demand they put him back? She smiled and said nothing and watched it happen in front of everyone who mattered. According to the aide who witnessed it, that moment was never really about a seating arrangement. It was about belonging. Camilla knew what people still whispered about her behind closed doors. She knew that no matter how many decades she survived inside that family, a portion of it would always see her as the outsider who somehow slipped through the gates. Pulling her own bloodline into the monarchy's future was her chance to finally rewrite that story. Once her family was inside too, nobody could ever treat her as a temporary guest again. She would have become part of the fabric, not an exception to it. That Christmas morning exposed something she wasn't ready to admit. The palace had already made its decision about her family. Nobody had bothered to sit her down and explain it, because they didn't have to. Watching her grandson get pulled out of that line said everything that needed to be said. And Camilla was about to discover exactly how far the people around her own husband were willing to go to make sure her bloodline stayed out for good. Those people had a name. Prince William and Catherine. And to understand why the two of them held the line so hard, you have to understand their philosophy about where this monarchy is going. To the public, William and Catherine look like the modern royal couple. Warm, relatable, easy to like. But people close to them describe something far more calculated behind the palace doors. From the moment William stepped into a senior royal position, he followed one rule, and he has never broken it. Protect the bloodline. And that wasn't about pride, and it wasn't royal arrogance. It was arithmetic. William understands something fundamental about the institution he's inheriting. The monarchy only survives if the public believes the line is clean and direct. Blood matters. And if blood matters, then titles have to prove it. That's where the quiet war with Camilla began. She wanted a blended family tree, one where her grandchildren and her civilian children eventually got folded into the royal picture. William and Catherine wanted the exact opposite. Only direct Windsor blood gets a title. William, as the future king, wanted a leaner monarchy. Fewer working royals. Clearer roles. And absolutely zero honors handed out just because someone happened to marry into the family. So when Camilla started floating title ideas for her grandchildren, the response she got was almost worse than a fight. William went completely silent. And that silence wasn't hesitation. It wasn't caution. It was strategy. Because William had a very long memory for small betrayals. Years earlier, Camilla had already won a modest victory, getting her children greater prominence at a state event. And what did she do the moment she had it? She reportedly leaked the details to a friendly royal reporter within weeks, spinning it publicly as proof that the family was finally embracing her children. The palace was blindsided. They scrambled to put out an emergency statement just to walk the whole thing back. William never forgot that mess. To him, it proved exactly what would happen if he gave Camilla even an inch on the grandchildren. It wouldn't stay private. It would be splashed across the papers within a month, dressed up as progress, and then handed back to her as ammunition for the next demand. So this time around, his answer wasn't a no. It was nothing. Because even responding to her would have handed her something to grab onto. Silence, in William's world, was the only answer that couldn't be spun. And Catherine wasn't just standing quietly beside him through all of it. She got involved directly. When the palace was choosing photographs for the annual Christmas card one year, Catherine personally asked for Freddy Parker Bowles to be cropped out of the final picture. Not because she had anything against him as a person, but because his face next to Prince George, Charlotte, and Louis would have quietly suggested a status he simply didn't have. She reportedly told an aide that she wasn't about to let one photograph undo years of careful work deciding exactly who counted as a part of the working royal family. And then came the moment Camilla truly understood how far she'd fallen. After the coronation, she requested a private one-on-one meeting with Prince William. Think about that for a second. She never had to ask Charles for a meeting, because Charles always came to her first. But William's office scheduled her in 3 weeks out. And then, as if that wasn't humiliating enough, the request was quietly folded into a group briefing packed with other senior staff. She never got her private audience. Not once. In that single scheduling detail, the message landed harder than any argument could have. The special access she'd once enjoyed was gone. She was no longer someone William needed to see or fear, or even acknowledge on her own terms. For years, Camilla kept pushing, and for years she kept meeting resistance. And then eventually, she wasn't even getting resistance anymore. She was getting nothing. A former aide put it simply. William never needed to argue his case out loud. He simply let the stillness answer for him. And Catherine had her own reason to stay firm. It wasn't personal dislike. It was optics. In a world where every single royal move gets pulled apart online within minutes, handing formal honors to step-grandchildren would scream favoritism. And favoritism is exactly the kind of public relations disaster the palace didn't need. So when the ceremonial title reserved for future kings finally came up, the same honor Camilla had spent years hoping might one day go to Freddy Parker Bowles, it was never really in doubt. And the way it was handled made sure there was no room for interpretation. This wasn't an announcement. It was an answer. Loud, public, and impossible to twist. It told everyone exactly where the monarchy's future belonged. With the Windsors. Not with the Parker Bowles line. People close to the family said William knew precisely how Camilla would react when she heard the news. And he made zero effort to soften the blow. None. He believed it was better to be brutally direct now than to string her along with false hope for another year. A source close to the family said it best. William wasn't cruel. He simply wasn't sentimental. Especially when it came to protecting the crown. So while everyone outside celebrated Prince George's bright future, inside one royal residence, Queen Camilla was reportedly falling apart. And here's the part that made it so much worse than simple disappointment. It wasn't really about Prince George. George didn't do anything wrong. He didn't take anything that was ever truly hers to lose. What broke Camilla was the message. Her own grandson had been told, without anyone ever saying a single word to him directly, that he never stood a chance. That all those years of photographs and invitations and quiet positioning had meant exactly nothing. William's position was painfully clear. Blood over blended family. Legacy over sentiment. And the monarchy's future was never going to be shared. Which leaves us with the man standing in the middle of the wreckage. Charles. Because publicly, Charles gets painted as the calm one. The steady hand. The man holding the whole institution together through years of chaos. But privately, He was about to make a choice that exposed something far darker. A choice that proved something palace insiders have whispered for years. Charles might wear the crown right now. But William controls the future. And apparently, that future has absolutely no room in it for the Parker Bowles family. Now, to be fair, this didn't happen in a single cold moment. Camilla had spent years leaning on Charles to help her family forward. She never demanded anything outright. She expressed her hopes quietly, the way she'd learned to do everything. Maybe a title for Freddy one day. Some kind of formal recognition that her grandchildren actually belonged close to this family. And Charles, ever the diplomat, always had the perfect answer. One day. When the moment is right. He told her that more than once, and she believed him, because she wanted to believe him. And why wouldn't she? This was the man who defied the entire world to be with her. If anyone would move heaven and earth for her family, it would be him. But then the actual moment arrived. The real decision. And suddenly, Charles was standing at a brutal crossroads. Give Freddy Parker Bowles the title and risk an open war with his own son and heir. Or hand it to William's line and shatter the woman he loved. There was no third door, no way to make everybody happy. And in the end, Charles chose the crown. Because when it really comes down to it, that's what he's always done. But sources say he didn't roll over immediately. He actually hesitated first. He reportedly proposed a genuine compromise, and this wasn't some vague gesture designed to keep Camilla quiet. Charles suggested reviving an old, dormant honorific. One that hadn't been used in generations, last attached to a distant relative who was never even in the line of succession. No land attached to it. No income. No claim to anything. Freddy Parker Bowles would simply carry a royal-sounding style at official events, without ever touching the actual system of titles that mattered. Charles had practically engineered it so William could say yes without surrendering a single thing of consequence. William said no anyway. He saw it as a crack in the dam. One honorific, however empty, would quietly poison the image of the royal bloodline for generations if he allowed it through even once. And Charles, a man who has spent his entire reign trying to keep this modern monarchy stable, finally caved. Here's the moment it actually happened. Charles called in his private secretary and asked him to draft the announcement naming Prince George as the recipient of the ceremonial title. The same title Camilla had spent years hoping would go to Freddy Parker Bowles. Then, completely unprompted, he added one more instruction. Freddy's name, and any mention of an alternative title, was to be kept out of every draft. Every briefing. Every piece of paper that would ever circulate. Camilla wasn't told any of this was happening. She didn't even know a draft existed. A palace insider later explained Charles's reasoning without any sugarcoating. He simply didn't want to fight his son. Defying William would have meant declaring war inside his own household. Father against son. King against future king. And when the choice finally landed in front of him, Charles wasn't willing to go there. He chose the peace of the institution over the peace of his marriage. And that choice was about to cost him something he'd never had to pay for before. His wife's trust. The event itself, meanwhile, was supposed to be small. A charming glimpse into Prince George's future, sent out to a public that adores him. To the palace, it was a clean media win during a rough stretch. To Camilla, it was devastating. And the detail that made it almost unforgivably humiliating? After decades of loyalty, decades of keeping her mouth shut and playing by their rules, she got zero warning. She found out through the official press release. The exact same announcement the rest of the world received. No private conversation with her husband. No quiet call from palace machinery she'd spent years serving. She opened the announcement like everyone else. An insider said she saw George's name in that release and simply froze. To anyone watching from outside, it looked perfectly normal. Of course Prince George got it. He's the future king. But to Camilla, that one piece of paper confirmed everything she'd quietly feared for months. Her family would always come second. Always. And that night, behind closed doors, the carefully composed queen that the world had watched for 3 decades finally disappeared. She broke down completely. Witnesses described her holding the printed announcement, the words she'd read like everyone else, and speaking in a way that was barely a whisper. The essence of what she said, according to those present, was about erasure. That after everything she had given, after everything she had survived, her family had been written out of the story. Not pushed aside with a polite conversation. Not eased out with a graceful compromise. Erased, as if they had never been part of it at all. And this wasn't just sadness anymore. It was rage. It was betrayal. It was a grief so deep that apparently even the crown she'd fought so hard to reach couldn't cover it. One courtier described the mood inside the residence that evening as tense, almost surreal. You could feel it in every room. You could hear it in the silence. Charles reportedly tried to comfort her, and out came the smooth, well-rehearsed explanations.
Tradition. Public expectation.
Royal strategy. All the usual palace language people reach for when they've already made their decision and now need you to accept it. But Camilla wasn't having any of it. Overcome, she looked at her husband and accused him directly, in so many words, of letting them humiliate her. And that's when the whole thing turned even uglier. Because suddenly this wasn't a betrayal by Prince William anymore. William had never promised her anything. He had told her, in every way except with words, what he thought of her family. No, this was a betrayal from her own husband. The one person who was supposed to protect her. She had stood beside Charles through decades of scrutiny, public contempt, and outright rejection by his own family. She had survived all of it beside him. And when she finally needed him to stand beside her, this was what she got. She asked him, reportedly, eye to eye, whether he had fought for her family at all. Whether he had tried even once. Charles was reportedly sorry, but he wasn't apologetic, and there's a massive difference between those two things. He genuinely believed he'd made the right call for the institution.
For the crown. For history.
Wonderful for history, perhaps. Not so wonderful for the woman sitting across from him, entirely wrecked by it. Because whatever justification he told himself, the emotional damage was already done. In the days that followed, Camilla cancelled several commitments, officially blaming health concerns. But staff noticed the change in her almost immediately.
Quiet. Distant. Ice cold.
And here's a tiny detail that somehow says more than any screaming headline ever could. For years, Camilla had personally picked out Charles's tie every single morning. It was their small private ritual, a daily thread between the two of them. After the announcement, she stopped completely. She handed the job over to his valet without a word of explanation. Charles reportedly asked her why once.
She didn't answer.
She just let the silence sit between them. And unusually for him, he didn't push. Because deep down, he knew what he'd done. For the first time since they got married, Camilla no longer felt safe with a man who had once defied the entire world just to be with her. Sources close to the family believe this decision is going to leave a permanent scar. Not the kind of political scar the palace can smooth over with a clever statement.
Something deeper.
Camilla spent decades walking a tightrope. Earning respect.
Staying silent.
Serving a family that once wanted absolutely nothing to do with her. She survived public hatred and years of media venom just to reach the top of the institution. And now, after all that sacrifice, she was being forced to face something brutally ugly. Maybe all of that acceptance had only ever extended to her. Maybe she had been welcomed in on her own, while her bloodline was always meant to stay on the other side of the door. For Camilla, the crown had always meant one thing. Proof that her past didn't define her anymore. Proof that she'd finally made it. But now, with her grandson passed over and her family's place in royal history quietly rejected, she was left sitting with a question she probably never expected to ask herself. After finally becoming queen, did she ever really belong there at all? When the dust finally started to settle, royal insiders began focusing on what this title snub actually meant. Not just for Camilla, but for the future of the entire monarchy. Because while everyone outside was fixated on the drama, something much bigger was quietly taking shape behind the palace gates. A generational divide.
And a deep one.
On one side stands the future. A sharper, leaner House of Windsor. William, Catherine, and their children, being carefully shaped into one tight modern royal core, built around tradition, clarity, and public appeal. On the other side sits what insiders now quietly call the blended branch. The Parker Bowles family.
Loyal. Present.
Always around. And completely unofficial. Welcome in the photographs. Locked out of the protocol. And here's what makes that remarkable. Camilla's side of the family tree wasn't pruned. That would have required acknowledging it, at least. It was simply ignored. And that kind of ignoring is its own message. One royal historian put it bluntly. You're watching two royal visions rip apart in real time. Camilla wanted a legacy that pulled her whole family in. William is building one that strips everything away except pure bloodline. And the problem is that both of them are completely convinced they're right. The implications are serious. This isn't just family drama that evaporates after a few bad headlines. This is a monarchy that could one day fracture, not because of an explosive scandal, and not because somebody steps down, but because of a slow, quiet break running straight through the family's identity. The Parker Bowles grandchildren aren't little kids anymore. They're growing up inside royal walls without a single royal title to their names. Think about how strange that actually is. They walk the same corridors as the Windsor children. They celebrate the same holidays. They eat at the same tables. They grow up in the same palaces. But underneath all that family warmth sits one painfully clear message. This world was never actually built for them. At one family Christmas at Sandringham, the place cards reportedly told the whole story before anyone even opened their mouths. Freddy Parker Bowles' name wasn't anywhere near the main table. He had been seated off in a separate room, alongside staff children and distant cousins. Close enough to see the dining room. Not actually inside it. And that year, Freddy was finally old enough to understand exactly what that seating arrangement meant. He turned to his mother and asked why he wasn't sitting with Prince George. And honestly, what was she supposed to tell him? There was no kind way to explain that the family he loved had quietly decided he didn't count. So what does all of this mean for the next generation? It means a monarchy built increasingly on hierarchy. And not just a hierarchy of power.
Something more personal.
A hierarchy of who actually belongs. Prince George, meanwhile, is already stepping into duties that hint very clearly at his future.
Honors.
Military patronages. Quiet introductions into diplomatic circles most people never even hear about. He isn't simply being raised as somebody's grandson anymore. Every step of his life is preparation for one thing.
Being king.
And Camilla's grandchildren? They hover right at the edge of public consciousness.
No honors. No mentions.
Not even a whisper of ceremonial involvement. They belong completely to the Queen's world when it comes to Christmas dinners and family photographs. But when it comes to the monarchy's actual future, they're nowhere to be found. And the granddaughter at the center of this whole story, the one the headline said was banned, Lola Parker Bowles, is part of that same quiet reality. Raised around royalty. Kept outside it. Now, some people argue this separation is absolutely necessary. The monarchy has to slim down. Cut the excess. Make the line clearer. Keep the institution manageable if it wants to survive in a modern world. That's a fair argument. But others warn that quietly pushing step-relatives to the edges like this could breed exactly the kind of slow-burning resentment that gets uglier with time. One source put it bluntly. What happens when Freddy Parker Bowles keeps watching Prince George collect one honor after another, knowing that at one point his own name was actually being considered for something similar? A former royal press officer added something even sharper. They're not children forever. And feelings don't magically disappear just because the palace decides nobody is allowed to talk about them. For now, William's approach is clearly working. The public adores his children. And let's face it, that image of a single pure, steady royal bloodline is an incredibly powerful thing to sell. But palace insiders warn that all this beautiful clarity comes with an emotional bill. And eventually, somebody has to pay it. Camilla is paying it right now, in real time. For her grandchildren, it might take years before they fully understand what was decided for them. But either way, the line has already been drawn. And this line goes far beyond titles and ceremonies. It runs straight through hearts, and straight across generations. The monarchy's future is going to be entirely Windsor-centered.
Full stop.
That argument is basically over. The real question left standing is what that kind of purity actually costs. And the answer could be painfully simple. A family divided permanently. Because for Camilla, the crown was never just about personal glory.
It was redemption.
After years of being mocked in public, whispered about behind closed doors, and blamed for one of the most notorious triangles in royal history, the crown was proof that she had finally survived all of it. She fought her way to the heart of this monarchy, and she got there. But she apparently never imagined that the institution she'd spent years clawing her way into would one day turn around and quietly shut the door on her family. She genuinely believed her grandchildren would benefit from everything she'd sacrificed. She believed that if she carried the crown with grace through decades of conflict, humiliation, and public hatred, she could clear a small path for her own bloodline. Not equality with the Windsors. Never that. She wasn't asking for Freddy Parker Bowles to stand beside the heir to the throne as an equal. She wanted something far smaller. Some symbolic respect. Some recognition that her family belonged somewhere inside the new modern royal court. Instead, she got silence. And then she got flat rejection. The ceremonial title handed to Prince George wasn't just a harmless formality anymore. It became a declaration. One that locked in the monarchy's unshakable commitment to bloodline over connection. And with that single decision, years of quiet hope were crushed in an afternoon. Her own position is secure now. Nobody is taking her crown away. But that security comes with one deeply humiliating catch. She's completely isolated. She'll keep standing beside Charles at every ceremonial event. She'll smile for the cameras. She'll wave from the balcony. She'll look every inch the queen. But underneath all of it, she'll know that as far as this institution is concerned, her legacy ends with her. The Parker Bowles name will never be written into royal history. Her grandchildren will never be announced with any grandeur. They'll never carry the weight of a title, not even the kind she would have gladly shared with the Windsors themselves. And that pain, she carries completely alone. Because in this new royal era, Camilla might wear the crown. But William and Catherine are shaping the throne. And their monarchy has made one thing painfully clear. There is zero room for blended families, sentimental exceptions, or special little favors because the queen happens to want one. Camilla pictured a legacy. A family name carried forward into the future of the most famous monarchy on earth. Instead, she was left holding one brutal truth.
She may be queen,
but her family was never royal. And after that one announcement, on that one ordinary morning, the door she'd spent decades pushing on finally closed.
quietly, completely, and for good.